Are you experiencing looseness in the steering? Maybe some wandering while you're driving, some tire wear, or in worst case scenario, you get some vibrations at higher speeds? That's what we found on this vehicle, and we narrowed it down to the inner tie rods. Whenever you're replacing the inner tie rod end, it's a good idea to replace the outer as well because it's going to be worn and you have to take it off anyway while you're doing the job. Luckily, 1AAuto.com has kits, so you don't have to think about it. Just order the kit and you can get both pieces and it's going to save you time and money. It's not so easy to see actual play. You can feel it. What we find on this vehicle is with the dial indicator, we can actually see the amount of movement and the play is coming from the inner tie rod. This is what our inner tie rod looked like before, and this is what it looked like after. These symptoms aren't only caused by failing inner tie rods. They could be caused by other components. We'll show you how we diagnosed it and how to fix it. With the vehicle supported off the ground, we want to shake down the front end and see if there's anything loose. You want to grab the top of the tire and the bottom of the tire and give it a shake. If you have significant movement there, you're looking towards the lower ball joint or even a wheel bearing. If there's excessive play, those can give you some of those symptoms. We also want to check the outer and inner tie rod ends, so you want to shake the wheel back and forth like this. You might not be able to see much here, but I can definitely feel it. It's a good idea to have someone underneath the vehicle and check that while you're shaking it, because it could end up being a lower ball joint that's tricking you. So you want to make sure that you're getting the right component. Underneath the vehicle, this is what you're going to be looking at is the lower ball joint when someone's shaking the wheel up and down. See if there's any movement there. You can even take your hand and just see if you feel any play there. Also, when you're checking for a wheel bearing, sometimes you're going to notice the rotor actually moving. That's what you're going to see first because the wheel bearing's buried in there a little bit, so it's not going to be that easy to see the visual of the wheel bearing. But if you see the rotor moving back and forth, that's an indicator that there's play in the wheel bearing. The lower ball joint and the wheel bearing are tight on this vehicle, so we don't have to worry about that. So checking side-to-side movement, you want to take a look at the outer tie rod end. And you can see that real well. You can normally see if the boot is moving or the tie rod staying still, but the knuckles moving back and forth. That's an indication there's play in there. And again, also be careful if the lower ball joint might have side-to-side movement. So when you're doing that, you might think it's a tie rod, but the ball joint's actually moving. And another way to check the inner tie rod end, when someone's shaking the wheel, you can actually grab the bellow boot and just put a little pressure, find where the inner tie rod end is, and if there's play there, you can usually feel a little bit of a clunk, or you can even actually feel the play right there. So that's a good way to check. What we find on this vehicle is with the dial indicator, we can actually see the amount of movement and the play is coming from the inner tie rod. Because the boot's over the inner tie rod, let's take the boot off and take a better look. When you're removing the outer tie rod end, it's always a good idea to count the threads as you unwind it and write that number down. Put the new one back together the same way you took it out. That way the alignment's going to be a little bit closer, and at the end of the video I'm going to give you a trick on how to get it even closer so you don't burn your tires out too quick. Now with the boot off, you can actually see what's going on. We put the other tie rod back together just so we could give the wheel a shake, and this is what's going on the inside when you have an inner tie rod end that's got play in it. You can see the ball and socket moving. If the boot wasn't there, you'd be able to see this, and it'd be a little bit easier to diagnose. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of movement, but a little bit near the tie rod end causes the tire to significantly have more movement than it should, and that's not good. Whenever you're removing the inner tie rod, it's a good idea to use some type of locking pliers or even a pipe wrench as close to the inner tie rod as possible so you don't mess up the shaft further down. And then you just tighten that down. Then you can loosen up the tie rod end and hold the locking pliers to prevent any internal damage to the steering rack. Sometimes it's not a lot of room in there to be able to get the pliers in there, so keep that in mind. Do the best you can with that. On the new inner tie rod, I'm just going to put a little thread lock adhesive, just a small dab, not a lot. You can get that started. And there's different tie rod tools you can use to do this. You may have to move the steering wheel one way or another to help get those locking pliers situated where they need to be while you're trying to torque this down. And make sure you torque it properly. Take the pliers off. There you go. Take that off. Just put in some grease, just where the bellow boot is going to ride, just so it's able to spin. Because if they need to do an alignment, you don't want the bellow boot to twist. You want it to be able to spin right there. Another thing to make your life a little easier, take a pry bar and just pry down on the top of the tie rod around where the stud is, just to prevent the stud from spinning. Then you can zip it on with your impact and it makes it a lot easier. Just get that there, and then you can torque it and it shouldn't spin with the torque wrench at this point. All right, that was a quick and easy job, and you can do it too. Get your parts at 1aauto.com, do those in pairs, and then you'll save your time in the future. Now I'm going to go over those quick alignment tips. This is going to help you out. So if you can't get to the shop right away, you have a little bit of time so you don't burn those tires out. A lot of people use the tape measure method where they check in front of the tire and then back of the tire and make sure that the measurement is the same or very close. The problem with that is you're unable to get the steering wheel centered at all. So this method that we're going to use actually gets the steering wheel centered so you can go straight down the road. You want to stabilize the car, so roll the car back and forth a few times, making sure the steering wheel is straight. And then you want to drive the front wheels over some trash bags or something slippery so the wheels can easily move back and forth. Then we're going to take a string. You're going to go front to back, have it secured on something. I'm just using jack stands. To make sure the string's in the right location, we're going to measure from the center cap of the wheel. So right here, we're going to do 2 inches, and you can adjust the jack stand, and then do the same in the front. Now that string is aligned. What we're measuring is where the tire is on the front of the wheel and the back of the wheel. So we're about 2 inches at the front, and it's about 1/4 of an inch less on the back. So this is tighter over here, this is further away. So the wheel is actually pointing towards the passenger side. So we need to, on this side, bring this in a little bit. You're going to have to loosen up the jam nut on the tie rod, spin like you're loosening the tie rod about 1/4 of a turn at a time so that you don't go too far. And I like to mark where the inner and outer tie rod are just to get a reference where it was when I started. Loosen up the jam nut. And since we want to bring the back of the tire towards the center of the car, we want to tighten that. So it's a good idea to do about 1/4 of a turn at a time. Snug this down and recheck it. You want it as close to 2 inches in the front and 2 inches in the back. It's going to give you the best case scenario going straight down the road. After finishing this installation, it's important to have an alignment done on your vehicle.